that missed this meeting. This meeting was designed to be a kind of a special meeting for commissioners and the public who want to better understand the model, the modeling assumptions, or the assumptions that went into the model in terms of kind of, and ask questions and kind of do a deeper dive. So that's what this meeting is intended to do, is to be able to field questions and make sure everyone has a good understanding of the assumptions. We will hear from our consultants who will give us background on the model, how it operates, and then we can field any question that people have around what the assumptions were for different programs and policies. So just a quick reminder of where we've been lately and what we've learned in the last couple of meetings. 2 meetings ago, we were able to view the results of the reference case, as well as the programs and regulations that have been adopted and the role they will play in reducing our emissions. And then the few that are still in rulemaking, but expected to be done this fall or early winter. So we can kind of take stock of where we are today. And when we did that, we discovered that we should be able to meet our 2035 goals as set forth in Governor Brown's Executive Order 20-04. And we discussed looking at some scenarios that would help us be even more ambitious and look at how to get to the 2035 goals by 2030, which is in keeping with kind of the best available science today. And at our last meeting, we actually looked at those alternatives and started to have a conversation about the scenarios and some of the financial information that was developed through the MAC curve and some other analyses that our consultants did for us to help us understand some of the big picture results. Today, we're, as I mentioned, we're doing a deep dive on the modeling assumptions and are here to answer any questions. We will be asking commissioners to walk through and raise questions first, but also want the public to be able to follow up on those questions if you have kind of related questions. And then there will be time at the end for additional public questions that may not fall within some of the specific questions that commissioners raise. So I want to make this a real opportunity for folks. Linda, what do people need to do if they want to interject and ask a question as we're going through this?
If they want to ask a question, down at the bottom, you're going to see a little emoji with a smiley face. They click on that, they should have a hand that they were able to raise. You raise your hand, then and click on that hand, then I will be able to see that come up and go ahead and call you. For those as an attendee, you should be able to pull up that hand and raise I should be able to see that too. And you will also come to the bottom of the list on the attendees, and I should be able to see you at that time and be able to pull you up and make sure that you're able to, and unmute you. So I should be able to do the call, be able to unmute you, and then you'll be able to mute yourself.
Thank you, Linda. Great. Before we get started, I'll go ahead and do a roll call of the commissioners that are here. Commissioner Reitman.
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Potowski.
Here.
Commissioner Pardue.
Here.
Commissioner Decker.
I'm here.
Excellent. And a couple of other of our commissioners are going to be joining us today, but are just a little bit late. So we'll make sure to catch them when they come in. So with that, I think we can pass things over to Chris. Alan, was there anything else I was supposed to cover that I may have forgotten, or Zach?
Just that we were the commissioners to ask questions first, and if it's on topic, then the public can chime in, but then we'll get to the public comment after
Yep.
the commissioners are done.
Yes, I think I mentioned that.
Okay.
Great. Well, Chris, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Thank you, Chair McDonald, and welcome everybody. Nice to see you all again. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. So as Chair McDonald mentioned, just set this up so I can see people. I don't like it when the video platforms change everything when you share your screen and you get it all set up and then it changes on you.
That's right.
So gotta get my windows back up here. So as Chair McDonald mentioned, I have a little bit of a presentation. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Kind of going to breeze through a lot of it. Everything that's on here has been presented to Commission before. You know, some of it's been a while ago, obviously, and so it's meant to kind of give a refresher overview of kind of all of the things we've talked about, and kind of provide a little context and have some placeholders for questions that we can maybe go back to, and obviously we can also kind of jump into the actual bowels of the model if that's where people desire to go. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking. I'm going to kind of go quickly, but obviously if you have questions, raise your hand and we'll address them, and yeah, make this kind of more of a discussion than a presentation. So. Just as kind of a reminder, so the model we're using is a systems dynamics model. So, don't get too caught up in the diagram, but the diagram is meant to represent the interconnectivity of all the different sectors and aspects of the modeling. So, we're not modeling one thing separate from another. We're modeling all the sectors and the energy systems within the state as kind of one whole system where there's connections that are meaningful, where we try and capture them as best we can within the modeling. So we're covering things like demographics. We do land use, so that was kind of we're starting there, but we kind of leaving that for another time. Buildings, transportation, water, energy generation, waste. So all the kind of major energy users within the sector, and then there's lots of aggregation, or I guess disaggregation in each of those sectors underneath, which we can talk about later if people want to get into that detail. We've seen various versions of this wedge diagram before. So again, not to get caught up kind of in the naming part, but there's the scenarios that we build are integrated scenarios. So all of the policies and actions that we've spent time creating and crafting together and deciding that we want to explore, they're layered on top of one another. So they're not independent from each other. So the order that we've modeled them matters, and changing that order can change the outcome or the impact of each of those policies and actions. So for example, if you put in a different heating system into a building that hasn't been retrofit, you're going to see a different kind of outcome or result, because that heating system will have a different load on that building than if you put it after the building has been retrofit, because you're decreasing the load of that building. So the order of the actions matter, and can change the results. So it's an integrated model in that sense. The scenarios are a collection of different policies and actions that we put in the model and stack together one on top of each other to understand, to get that interaction and to explore the interaction between those policies. Spatially, so we are modeling things at the county level, as we've mentioned before. So it allows us to kind of look at different counties and see what the effects or the impacts of those policies that we've explored have on those different counties. Because as we know, there's a lot of diversity within the state. So understanding and exploring that is useful. So stocks and flows, systems dynamics models are built up of stocks and flows. So those are kind of the fundamentals of a systems dynamics model. Excuse me, so I'm just gonna close my door. Apologies there. So a stock is a collection of objects or things. So in this case, you can see a collection of cars or buildings or heating equipment. And flows is the measure of change over time. So A couple of different flows that we have is like energy use. So energy use can be a flow or a change of energy use over time, or a change of the actual physical aspects in the state. So in this example, we're looking at the change of the vehicle stock. You know, introducing electric vehicles in the system due to that stock of the total stock of vehicles within the state of Oregon over time. So stocks are important aspects. Understanding how the stocks work and actually modeling those appropriately can matter, because stocks provide balance to the system, and they also provide kind of a delay or a lag in the system. So the model incorporates that, so you can't just all of a sudden, you know, go from one year to the next, change out all your heating systems to like heat pumps or something, because we know that that's not how it works. You know, people have a heating system, and eventually that heating system gets old and then it needs to be replaced. And so we tell the model what the marginal shares are, what the new shares are supposed to look like. So at the end of that life, it's either, you know, it can be anything we tell it to, but it doesn't just change over the next day. So so that delay is important to understand when we're creating those parameters, and we've looked at that before. So the model has been calibrated to match as best we can the state of Oregon in 2019. And the calibration process is where we look at all the various data sources within the state. So state level is obviously our first choice. Then it would be region, then it's federal. And if we can't find any federal sources, then we go kind of outside of that, kind of best practices, anything international or things like that. But most of our sources are Oregon or definitely US specific. And so what we do there is, at first, obviously, the model doesn't know anything about what Oregon is or what's happening there. And so, you know, you populate the model with some kind of initial inputs, and then you tune that model. So you adjust the intensities within that model until your modeled outputs match your observed data. So things like, for example, energy use or electricity use in the residential sector. So we tune the model, we tune the energy use intensities of those buildings, we tune the mix of, you know, heating or fuel shares, so how much electricity is used for heating, for example, versus natural gas is used for heating. And so we tune those based on data that's, you know, relevant to Oregon until we match the observed amount of electricity use in that stock. And we do that for all the different fuels and all the different areas and sectors of the model, so that we're matching the energy use and the emissions generated in the state. And then that allows us to say, you know, at this point in time, we're, you know, representing Oregon as best we can in a fair amount of certainty. And then jumping off from there, the simulation period lets us take those same levers and turn them to explore different pathways based on, you know, the parameters or based on what we want to see. So that's where we tune those, and then we turn these outside of balance to say, oh, what happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? What are the possibilities and what are the outcomes of exploring that? And the main data sources that we use for this calibration and generally for, I guess, the business's plan part of it as well, yeah, you can see we use various like US Census, NEA, CEDS, which is an energy database. For the emissions inventory, we use DEQ's emissions inventory. So again, we were tuning the model so that the emissions coming out of the model in 2019 matched what DEQ was reporting. And then also too, we had many meetings with you all at the commission, as well as the various agencies within the state to understand, you know, what the state is in 2019, but also understanding, you know, the different policies and regulations that were adopted and under development for the development of the base, the reference scenarios. So the business as usual, or what we generally call the business as usual or business as planned, but, you know, we're using a little bit of different terminology in this case. So yeah, maybe I'll pause for any questions about kind of, I know you probably want to get into the, you know, the actions and stuff like that, but any questions around the kind of the model itself and the model structure and that kind of context or the calibration that anybody wants to bring up before I kind of move on?
Chris, I don't see any hands raised. Oh,
Okay.
yes, Pat Delacoy, just a moment. Pat, you're unmuted.
Great. Can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can.
Great. This is Pat DeLaQuille with the Metro Climate Action Team. How does as I understand it, the model works on annual energy flows. What are the time periods that you use? Are they annual time periods or something else? And how do you deal with your peak demands? I mean, I have a lot of experience with times modeling, and we divide the year up into maybe 12 or 16 fragments, maybe 4 seasons and 3 times a day. And each load has a duration curve, so we can keep track of peak load. So when we optimize on annual energy flows, the constraint is there that we have to meet the peak depending upon how much reserve margin you want to input into the model. So how do you deal with this issue of peak demand?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so this is an annual model, or the one we're using right now. And it is every year from 2019 all the way up to 2050. So as part of this project, we haven't been tasked to explore kind of the peak or the daily loads that these scenarios would generate, but we can, and we have before, and we can apply 8760 load curves to the model at various years to look at the implications of those actions.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Looks like Mary has her hand up.
Thanks, Gary.
Hi, thank you for presenting that. I was just curious, I see that to get natural gas, electricity, and other fuel uses, you used one data set, and I was curious why this was chosen over, things like EPA reported data or, or other sources, just so we can understand why this is the resource. So it source a lot there.
Bass, you want to jump in for that one?
Yeah, I don't know why we chose this one in particular. I mean, the sets had natural gas, electricity, and all other fuels specific for Oregon, and so it was a one-stop shop, complete data set for the energy consumptions in Oregon, and so that's the data we used as in our assumptions, and so we've calibrated the model to meet these energy consumption numbers.
So it was a simplifying, because it was all in one place. I just didn't know if it was, part of the model was to get a certain data set, or if this is just the input. So thank you, that helps.
This is just an input to the model, yeah, right. So I don't know how different the EPA data set would be in terms of, if we would look at energy, electricity use from the EPA for Oregon, would that be very different from the electricity use that SADS reports?
I am not as familiar with SEDS. I'm more familiar with the reported data that goes to EPA. So that was why I was curious.
I can look into, we can look into if they are different. And I mean, it would be a good question why they would be different. But presumably they are the same. And in that case, basically, and then it doesn't really matter which data set we use. But
yeah, we're not tied to any specific data set. It's kind of like, what's the best of it that we can find and available.
That's a great question. We'll do a little homework on that.
All right, long pause to make sure everybody has a chance to think about a question. So, okay, obviously, if we want to circle back, feel free. No, just because we're moving on doesn't mean we can't come back to it. So, but I wanted to pause just so I'm not speaking too much. Right. So the next kind of phase is going to kind of look at the modeling results. And again, these are all the graphs that you've seen previously. Again, just kind of going over, refresh your memory, go over them really kind of quickly, and we can always come back to them if anybody has any questions. But the kind of the process that we went to get to this point was, so there's the identification phase. So what actions what policies did we want to explore? And if you all remember, we had took a couple of meetings to kind of go through that action list line by line and set the parameters and the what's in, what's out. And the second phase was kind of looking at what the relative impact of each of those actions are. What is our best guess of the impact that those actions are going to be? Because we definitely want to focus on impacts that, or actions that, or policies that, did the most bang for our buck, and maybe with our limited time and resources, maybe not look at the ones that are kind of smaller in scale. So there was some actions that we left on the cutting room floor, and we do have a record of all of those actions that we explored. So, and I believe you've seen them already, and they're I'm pretty sure they're posted somewhere, but we can definitely make sure that they are. And then the third phase was kind of setting the parameters. And again, with the commission, we went through that process of is this an appropriate level of retrofitting? Is this an appropriate level of heating system adoption? Is this an appropriate level of whatever? And so we did that with the commission, with the various agencies, with some of the different utility partners here as well, had input into those actions and those parameters. And then the fourth step was kind of bringing those together and defining some scenarios. So, taking all those actions and policies and kind of grouping them together into a scenario. And we started off with 3, and then we ended up with kind of 2, with the electrification and the hybrid scenario going forward. And that's the 2 that will be, be going over here shortly. So we started with the roadmap reference case. So this was kind of, if we apply nothing other than for population growth, employment growth, and then that would be building and buildings associated with that. And so very, very little policy interruption or policy change going on there. So if nothing major happens from 2019, what would happen, or what would the state of Oregon look like? So not super useful, but a good reference point for exploring this next slide, which is the programs and regulations adopted and under development. Oh, I thought I changed that heading. It just says adopted here. But you can see here, so these 2 kind of sections, so these are the programs and regulations adopted. So this includes things like HB 2021, CPP, Alan, you can definitely jump in here. You remember them all more than me, but the Advanced Clean Fuel Standard. And then we also then there's also kind of a fuzzy line between, well, there's some policies and programs that are kind of on the floor and maybe not quite finished, or not quite in rule, or almost in rule, or almost funded. And so we wanted to include those as well. So that's kind of this yellow section here is or the Advanced Clean Cars update and the Advanced Clean Fuels update. Maybe advanced isn't in front of that one, but the Clean Fuels update. So there's a couple updates to some policies and programs that we wanted to include as well. So that's kind of what this yellow section is. And at the end of the day, when we modeled this, we saw, oh, we're actually pretty close to or almost hitting the 2035 target that the commission wanted to explore. And so that brought up some interesting challenges for us, which led to kind of the work that kind of preceded that.
Right, there was a baker dozen
Here they are.
programs that were involved here in the last 2, Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is what California just adopted. 100% of new car sales are EVs by 2035. So it changes the gradual upward graph of the EV adoption to a hockey stick graph. And then same with Clean Fuel Standards, goes from the current 10% all the way up to 37%. But the 2 big additional lever programs are the Climate Protection Program and HB 2021, the 100% clean electricity bill. Those are the ones that account for most of the bulk of the emissions reductions.
Yeah, and that's what this slide here will show us. So you can see HB 2021 is very big, and then the CPP broken out into kind of the industrial and the fuel versions here. And so I guess just to as a note, so under this part of the modeling phase, we weren't specific or prescriptive about how HB 2021 will be met. We just kind of said, the utilities are working on it, and in the model we fudged it by removing emissions from the electricity sector, and didn't say how that would be replaced. And then the same thing here for this purposes of the CPP. We weren't prescriptive on how the CPP was going to be met by the utilities and other players. So we just, again, in this kind of, for this wedge, just kind of fudged it in the background, and through the exploration of some of the actions or policies in the decarbonization scenarios, that's where we kind of played around with some of the policies or possibilities that could be applied to or attributable to the CPP.
Right. Said maybe a little more nuance on that. So with both the CPP and HB 21, those are the big lever programs, and they both will have very robust regulatory processes with the PUC to figure out exactly how those get implemented over time, with thousands of hours and millions of dollars spent to figure that out over time. And we were not going to try to second guess that and try to figure out what was going to happen there. We just assumed that it was going to happen, and that both of those programs meet the legal requirements of reductions on the schedule that they were supposed to meet. So we didn't try to figure out what was going to cause the reductions, but we did assume that they were going to be successful and that they were going to meet the reductions, both for the HB 2021, 100% clean electricity, and the CPP, which is about fossil fuels. And the CPP, by the way, if you didn't know that, is gasoline, diesel, natural gas, propane, all of the fossil fuels. And that's 50% reduction by 2035 and 90% by 2045.
Yeah, so another question.
Sorry, trying to get organized here. So I'm asking a question for a staff person, but I wanted to ask a question on the fuels. If on how we did the modeling for the, sorry, this is Suzanne Carlson with ODOT. And we're asking some questions, especially because we're also looking at doing some performance measures and projections of how we think the state agencies have been implementing the executive order and accomplishing some of these goals. So can you talk a little bit about how you applied the CPP gas restrictions and some of the details? Is that appropriate for this call to get kind of into the data details of how you did that?
That's very appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, can you elaborate? Like, what do you mean by the gas restrictions?
All right, let me literally read you her question because she's
Okay.
up today.
That sounds good.
How sophisticated is the vehicle fuel modeling, especially with trucks and the various regulations? Did we just apply the CPP gas restrictions after accounting for blends, or did we get into the details? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Let me take a crack, and then maybe Vas, you can jump in. So, we did model things like advanced clean trucks, where we actually modeled like fuel switching of vehicles, or the adoption of different technologies. For the actual kind of unknown part of the CPP wedge, we didn't, as Alan mentioned, we didn't model any specific policies or drivers that would happen, just because we didn't know what they were at the time. They can be kind of broad, and the I guess the suppliers of the fuels can do many different things, and not a lot of them are really set in stone or planned out quite yet, or at least when we were working on it, just because it's a pretty new program. So kind of in this case, just to show the impact or the magnitude of that wedge, really what we did in the background, again, as a fudge, was we just decreased the emissions factors of those fuels on the timeline of the CPP. Now, how those emissions are obtained obviously can be many and varied, and we didn't want to get into the kind of the details of it for this phase of the program or of the work.
Okay, great. And I apologize, I might have missed it when you were talking about that.
No, it's great.
I'll just add something to it. So if you look at the graphic here, gasoline and diesel gets impacted by Advanced Clean Cars 1, Advanced Clean Trucks, the Federal CAFE standards, and Advanced Clean Cars 2. So all those things serve to either clean up and the Clean Fuels program. All those serve to either clean up the fuels in terms of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions or increase the gas mileage, which means less usage and therefore less emissions, or increase EVs, which means that we'd have a shift to electricity and away from gasoline and diesel. And so all of those things combined serve to get at the reductions of the gasoline and diesel. For that last little green box or wedge is the well, the one before that, the orange box, is the industrial processes. So there's a separate section in the CPP for industrial. And then the last one is that green wedge, which is the CPP fuel. There's a little bit left over after you get to all those gasoline and diesel reduction project or programs and regulations, but most of that is actually natural gas. And that is what Chris was talking about, where we didn't try to figure out exactly how they're going to reduce the natural gas greenhouse gas emissions, but we assume that they will meet the regulatory legal requirements of the CPP rules.
Yeah, if we didn't have advanced clean trucks in these program, then this green wedge would be much bigger.
Much bigger, yeah, right, and it would be a lot more gasoline and diesel. But so for CPP again deals with all those fossil fuels: gasoline, diesel, natural gas, propane. And we didn't talk about fuel.
So I'll ask a follow-up just as long as I'm got my nose in here. Have you isolated, since we're transportation, we're just looking at transportation emissions, have you isolated transportation? I know that as you mentioned, this puts together all the fuels.
Yep.
All types of fuels, all types of sectors.
So this is the kind of composite of everything, but we can pull like energy and emissions by for transportation and by the different fuels and by the different vehicle types and things like that. So
Right.
so we have it broken up between personal use and commercial. And of personal use, we definitely have a lot more detail around. Obviously commercial can be a little bit more fuzzy, especially when you get to like the heavier trucks and stuff like that aren't necessarily registered in Oregon, but are operating in Oregon. So, but we do have kind of those two sectors, and we have the different fuels and different kind of classes of vehicles.
Right. So you can do light duty, medium duty, heavy duty. So we don't show it by sector like you're asking for, Suzanne. We're showing it by each of the programs that the state or regulations that the state either has adopted or is going to adopt in the last two advanced cars and expansion of the CFP. So we're showing it by program, but we could break it out by sector in a different format. We'll probably do that in a report, but not on this slide.
And you could do that across all these areas: clean fuels, advanced trucks, etc. Okay, great. We'll want to talk more about that. Just we want to make sure that we're telling us, well, that if our modeling tells a different story, we kind of want to know why. So we just want to get behind the scenes and see how it's done. Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
totally.
Thank you, Suzanne, and we can definitely follow up as your modeling continues. I just wanted to recognize that we've been joined for a while with some additional commissioners: Commissioner Apter, Commissioner Jackson, Commissioner Magnera, Representative Helm, and Mary Morelands is standing in for Commissioner Anderson. I just wanted to recognize that. Thanks for joining.
I see one hand up, but I thought I saw another hand go up before that. I'm not sure if their hand is still up.
I don't, oh, there, Commissioner Apter.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I think we've had this discussion at previous meetings, and this might be more for a later conversation as we're moving to the report itself. But I think some of the assumptions around CPP implementation, including maybe particularly around CPP industrial processes, should be called out. That part of the rules in particular is more of a target, as we know, as opposed to a hard declining cap. As is the case for the fossil fuel suppliers that are covered under the program. So Just wanted to raise that again. I understand for the purposes of modeling, we're assuming perfect implementation of these programs and that target would be achieved. But of course, that will be entirely dependent on how DEQ's best available emissions reduction determinations for each of those individual covered sources is implemented and applied. So understand that's hard to nuance within the modeling framework, but I do want to continue flagging it as we consider how we're couching these findings.
Thank
We
you.
did
Commissioner
actually
Apter.
discuss that with DEQ and ask them, because it doesn't say how that is going to actually play out, especially with the industrial customers. And the response that we got from them is that the way that we should model this is that they meet the CPP requirements of reductions at the same rate and the same timing. So we modeled all of that on the same stair stepping down of emissions as we did with the rest of it.
And I think Commissioner Apter is just recommending that we continue to remind folks that, you know, a few of these are a little softer than some of the others in terms of requirements.
Yeah, and those requirements still have to be played out as they go down the road. So my understanding is DEQ is going to roll that out for the industrial customers over in the near term.
Correct. And our intent is to update our modeling and report on a regular basis as we learn more about what the regulated entities are doing to meet House Bill 2021 and CPP. So we'll definitely stay on top of that and try and build that into our future analyses. Any other questions? Okay, take it away again, Chris.
Sounds good. So now the next set of slides are going to dive into the decarbonization pathways or scenarios that we explored. And this was the latest information that we just shared with you. I don't know, it seems like yesterday, but I know it was a lot longer, a lot longer than that, a couple of weeks ago at least. So we have two scenarios, the electrification scenario. So you can see here, the blue line is kind of the combination of those programs and regulations adopted under development. And then there's some future actions that we've explored. And so, you know, as we notice that you know, we're kind of reaching the target already. Alan and Kathy in the group, and I think through the commission there was a desire, or we heard that you know, what happens if Oregon moved faster? What would that look like? And so we took that up to say, okay, well, what, you know, if we crafted these extra scenarios, you know, what could happen and how fast could Oregon move and to reach the target by 2030? So that's kind of the intent of these scenarios was to explore that option and what it would take, and what would it take to go above and beyond kind of this blue section here. And so this the new section is made up of a whole bunch of different actions. So we're looking at things like retrofitting residential buildings and commercial buildings, replacing heating equipment with, in this case, electric heat pumps. Some, looking at medium and heavy duty vehicles and increasing that above the advanced clean trucks and pushing that a little bit farther and faster. And so what if we replaced the fossil fuels in those vehicles with make them zero emission vehicles, not necessarily all electric, but more so in this scenario than the hybrid scenario. So what if we did some vehicle sharing, shifting more to transit and doing some mode shares and things like that? What if we address some industrial processes and made the industrial processes more efficient? Well, how would those all impact, or what would the impacts of those be? And then so the hybrid scenario, again, similar. The difference being that instead of going whole hog on the electric transition, where there was already electricity being used, we weren't switching that out for other fuels, but we were saying that where there were places like natural gas or some other fossil fuels, we would replace those with RNG, hydrogen, mainly RNG and hydrogen in this case, but obviously as time goes on and research and development increases, there might be other fuels in the future that you could replace them with. But to our best knowledge, RNG and hydrogen are kind of the main two players right now. Also a little bit of biomass too. There's some torrefication that's happening, I think, in Southern Oregon. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alan. That we heard about at the very beginning of the project, so we included some of that application as well because that sounded kind of interesting. So a comparison, so you can see the reference scenario, the programs and regulations adopted, programs and regulations under development, and then here's the two alternative scenarios that we explored. So you can see they both kind of reach the same point in 2030 and 2050, and there's kind of a little bit of a dip here or a difference between the two going forward, and mainly that's in the industrial sector because the industrial sector is really hard to electrify, and so we couldn't push quite as hard on the industrial sector in that case. So that's one of the areas that I remember that's causing that gap there. So again, I think you've seen. Sorry, Chair McDonald. Does everybody have access to this presentation already, or have we shared that with them?
It was just posted before the meeting.
Okay, so I'm not gonna go through kind of all these. I think we've shared them before, and it is posted. So if you want to download the copy and kind of go through them, because and we can always jump back if people have questions. But there are a lot of common actions between both of the scenarios. So a lot of efficiency measures, a lot of fuel switching. Again, the difference being in the fuel switching is that what kind of fuels we were using to shift from. So for example, in the residential sector, it's either we went like almost 100% electric heat pump, but again, we would have some electric heat pump, but also some natural gas heat pump where it made sense to do that. And then there's a lot of things around kind of waste and water efficiency that we kept the same and constant across both the scenarios. So the main differences here between the scenarios is, well, apart from what I mentioned about the fuel switching, is that in the electrification scenario, we also put in some distributed energy within the model to look at how that could impact or help, especially around HB 2021. We electrified the industrial scenario, and in the hybrid one, instead of electrifying, we introduced hydrogen into the industry. Like I mentioned, we used RNG, so we used the full technical potential of RNG that we figured out. I guess the number we kind of got circulate through our conversations we had with Northwest Natural, and I know we're still probably a little lower than the number that they use, but it's I think we're pretty close in the same ballpark between the amount. It's a tricky one because it's hard to know how much you could trade or get from other places, so we tried to pick a number that kind of was in the middle of the road, at least. For realism, because it might be a little bit more, it might be a little less. Hard to pin down the exact number, obviously, going forward. And then we also did a little bit of hydrogen fuel cells within homes as well. Yep.
Chris, just maybe because I think people will want to know that we looked at the estimated production through time, and then assumed Oregon would kind of get its share based on population. Is that correct?
So we used kind of a US-wide potential of RNG availability, and then we downscaled that based on the population of Oregon to say, well, this is approximately what Oregon could get. And like I mentioned, obviously it could be more, it could be less, depending on trade and demand and those types of things. But I know the utilities are hard at work at figuring that out.
And then
Chris,
Chris,
one more thing to that.
a question in the chat. The model doesn't include any form of carbon capture, either technological or natural, correct?
We did not apply that in these scenarios, but we could, yeah. but that wasn't a decision we as a group, that was never decided on as a part of the action, but could be an option.
That could also be part of the actions that would be taken to comply with HB 2021 to deploy carbon capture and storage. So that wasn't something we were going to model for these particular actions, which are additional to getting to the target of 2035. But one more nuance on the RNG. So people are aware that Odo did back in 2018-19 RNG inventory, which showed about 20% of Northwest Naturals usage could be covered by indigenous homegrown Oregon RNG. The fact is you can import RNG, so we didn't limit it to just what was producible what could be produced in Oregon, but we, as Chris said, took a look at the estimate nationally of how much RNG could be produced, and then took Oregon's fair share. We're 1.2% of the country, so we took 1.2% of that estimate, and that's the number that we applied here, and that's the 47.5 trillion BTUs that would be available to Oregon. So it's our share of the estimated potential RNG development. And for the hydrogen, we did assume 15% injection into the pipeline by 2035. For industry, it's a little bit more complicated, harder to come by, and that doesn't show up until later in the out years of the model.
Looks like Mary has a question.
Great. Mary?
I just wanted to start by thank you by saying, always glad to see inclusion of low carbon and no carbon gases in projections. So appreciate that coordination. You're right, we definitely are, I think, more bullish, but it's good to see. But I was curious, in this national estimate, was this in advance of the tax credits that have come through in the IRA on both the hydrogen and RNG front? And do you anticipate those might change the projections in future updates?
It was before that, so it doesn't include that.
Yeah, this
just makes
from before. Yeah, so this is an estimate prepared by ICF, the American Gas Foundation study, and so they have a trajectory for RNG supply available going up to, I think, 3,750 trillion BTUs per year by 2040, all of the US. And as Alan mentioned, we've taken Oregon's share of that potential, and that comes down to the 47.5 trillion BTUs by 2040 for Oregon.
Thank you.
And it's also kind of hard to tell whether the IRA will just make the RNG cheaper, or versus how much will expand RNG production. Well, that's remained to be seen and beyond the scope of what we're trying to do. And that's why we'll be updating this on regular every 2 years or so.
Yeah, and obviously the model's already out of date. It was out of date probably the day after we generated these scenarios, and so these pathways are based on these assumptions that we have written down here, and they're definitely not I guess prescribing what to do in the future, but showing, I guess, setting a pathway, and there's going to be flexibility required going forward when implementation is happening. Hi, Nora.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, I was just curious. I'm seeing 70% green hydrogen industry by 2050, and then 50% hydrogen to the pipeline by 2035. So those assumptions in terms of availability, I assume these aren't mutually exclusive. That's based on the assumptions around availability for Oregon, kind of splitting those by use. And I'm also curious, is the 15% hydrogen in the pipeline, that's not, it seems limited to green hydrogen.
Well, yeah, I guess like we didn't mention it there, but I don't know, maybe Alan and Kathy can jump in, but I guess in my mind you would aim for green hydrogen. Otherwise, you're not really fixing anything. You're not really limiting your greenhouse gas emissions unless unless I guess it was accompanied by the some sort of carbon capture or something like that during the generation phase. It's kind of hard to model all those different options.
And in the model, Chris, didn't that 15% created reductions in greenhouse gas emissions? So it was green hydrogen that was being.
For simplicity, we assume it's green hydrogen, but like I said, you can make green hydrogen in a number of different ways. It could be green electricity that's with electrolysis, where you could generate I can't remember all the different colors. There's like turquoise and blue and
Yeah, and hopefully they'll do
things.
away with that.
So you could generate hydrogen that way, and then capture the methane, and then with some of those carbon capture and technology storage. But we didn't model the different technologies being used to generate the hydrogen. We're just assuming that the hydrogen has to be green in order to be used, or has to be clean, I guess would be a better way of putting it, in order to be used.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
So, and I guess from an emissions point of view, as long as it's clean, it would be more of a cost kind of impact or financial impact on how it's generated and the costs associated with that, and then for the price of the hydrogen, which again are hard to estimate with so many different technologies and available to people to use.
Thank you. So I guess just with like the 15% hydrogen, again, recognizing this broader conversation around limited availability of this source, is that's the maximum, or just curious? I mean, seems like we would want to prioritize the hard to electrify sectors in the hybrid scenario. So just curious about that. That's just assuming all available is injected into the pipeline by 2035.
I know Mary could probably speak to this if she wanted to, but I believe the max, or the range, is about 15 to 20% is the maximum you can inject into the natural gas, or the amount of hydrogen you can inject into the natural gas system. So that's kind of a natural limitation there before you have to, and I believe that has again, Mary probably can jump in, it has a limitation to do with the distribution system.
No, actually, it's
is
due
it?
to the end use equipment.
end
It
use
triggers the lobby
equipment.
number and combustion heat, production after that point.
Yeah, you'd have to get new appliances and new heaters and
Right.
things.
Does that answer your question, Nora? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just still curious. Sorry, I may have missed this earlier. I joined later, but the 70% green hydrogen in industry, I guess I'm just curious if we're assuming the maximum availability, how is that being divided? And I assume these aren't mutually exclusive. Just the assumption there versus, and how that interplays with the hydrogen injected into the pipeline.
Yeah, I guess unlike natural gas or renewable natural gas, where it's kind of in some ways a natural limitation to the amount of material you can use to make that RNG. We're assuming that hydrogen could be that the amount of hydrogen required could be produced at those periods for that, by that time frame in order to kind of achieve this scenario. So it's more of a goal to produce that much, to be able to provide that much energy, since there's no real kind of natural limitation. You can produce an electrolysis facility to produce as much hydrogen as you want. It's just a matter of investment, where RNG is kind of limited in some ways, with some stars and caveats, obviously.
Commissioner,
And
after
it's also important to make sure it's clear that the different time frames for these different actions. So industry is 2050, RNG is 2050, but the pipeline's 2035, 2030, 2035. So different time scales for to get it all in place.
And Commissioner Apter, are you also kind of asking about where these reductions were applied and whether or not there was any potential for double counting, or am I?
Yeah, I think I have that answered, but happy for any further clarification on that.
Should we apply the hydrogen to specific sectors, or just into the natural gas system in general?
The 15% hydrogen injection in the pipeline takes all the stationary energy use. So we take natural gas flow and mix in 15% of that flow and replace that 15% of natural gas by hydrogen. The 70% green hydrogen in industry is a dedicated flow, so that's not blended in any other in the natural gas distribution system. That's just industry using pure hydrogen for their operations, mostly for process heat and.
So you did apply these two different sectors, you know, like the first one is applied to industrial process or industrial
Correct.
use,
Yeah.
energy use,
Yeah.
versus the 15%, which could have been residential.
Correct. Yeah, the
Well,
50%
the only one that's
residential and commercial, and
yeah. So the only one that's segregated out is the industrial load. And the counterpart on the electrification action is the last one there, where 70% of industrial electrification occurs by 2050. So those two things are kind of counter each other. So the only sector we pulled out, we treated is in the industrial sector. The commercial and residential we treated as the same as being served by pipeline.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Looks like Mary has her hand up.
Great. Mary?
I appreciate all the time you are allowing. I realize I have a lot of questions.
It's great.
But I was
That's what we're here for.
curious, thanks. In the industrial electrification modeling, is this based on the current mix of industrial applications and businesses, or the different sides assuming different end uses, just knowing that it looks like it'd be two very different industrial sectors, if one that can be electrified that deeply on the electrification front?
yeah, we don't have a great deal of insight in the industrial processes, so we're kind of using default end use distributions in industry, and so a large part of industrial end use of energy use is for process heat, and we have kind of assumed that we can electrify 70% of the process heat, as well as being able to use hydrogen for 70% of the process heat. We don't really know what kind of the technologies and what kind of processes this process heat is being used for. So it's a bit of an assumption there that we can electrify to that extent, and the same thing for hydrogen. If we can use hydrogen for that kind of penetration in process heat, but without knowing exactly what kind of industries there are in Oregon and where, and sort of what the specific processes that are occurring, it's kind of difficult for us to get into more detail there. So.
Yeah, I think the hydrogen pathways probably makes a little bit more sense in the industry than the hydrogen side, just from what my engineering background tells me. But we wanted to kind of just show the impacts of both. So I think that's why we kind of added that the industrial electrification was kind of an additional one, just so we can kind of do apples to apples comparison a little bit more. Otherwise, we weren't doing anything in the industrial sector in the electricity side of things. So. Is there any other question? I see Pat's somebody called Pat's hand jumps up every once in a while. I'm not sure if we're ignoring him, and he might just not be on the panel or something.
No, I had a question earlier and I changed my mind. I'm going to
Okay.
come back to it here in this context. If I understand you correctly, you're not modeling any technologies to generate the hydrogen, so that am I right in assuming that you have a cost of hydrogen that you're assuming over time, and that whenever you specify some percentage of hydrogen going to a sector, that the impact is the cost? And I'm wondering, I mean, aren't you missing then the impact on electricity generation, or whatever source of that hydrogen is? And I'm just puzzled as to the technology richness of the model. I heard you say that you have different types of vehicle stocks and things like that. So I'd really like to hear in more detail how you deal with these questions of technology and costs of fuels and that kind of structure of the model.
Yeah, in this case, for hydrogen, we assume that hydrogen is being imported from outside of Oregon. And so that avoids the complication that we need to generate a whole lot of electricity to produce the hydrogen within Oregon. And obviously that comes at a cost. So you pay for the hydrogen, you import it, just like we import gasoline.
What was your source of data for that? What did your assumptions that you're using for that? Is that something that we can review at some point in time?
The cost data you can review, I think,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yep, there is. We do have a cost catalog for all our cost assumptions that's available. I'm not sure. Again, Kathy and Alan would know when or where that's posted.
We're working on putting together each action's cost and amount of reduction, as well as the data sources. We haven't quite got that complete to put up on the website yet.
All right, thank you.
But you are right, Pat. Like, if it was generated, so I guess to be fair, we're not modeling any of the kind of energy consumption from the generation of fuels, neither from natural gas or electricity. Within this model is kind of, I guess, outside of the scope of what we're looking at. But to be complete, yeah, you would want to include all those as well for sure.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on the scenarios and the assumptions?
What emissions intensity does the model assume for RNG? I don't know, Babs, if you know it off the top of your head, or if you want to pull that up.
We get no CO2 emissions from RNG combustion, but we have minimal CH4 and N2O emissions from RNG. There are, however, fugitive emissions associated because RNG flows through a natural gas distribution system with, some leakages in there. And so, fugitive emissions, it doesn't really matter if it's fossil natural gas or renewable natural gas. And so most significantly, RNG leads to fugitive emissions, but not combustion emissions. They're very minimal because the CO2 we don't count.
Laura, did you get your question answered?
Linda, can you unmute Laura?
Looks like you're unmuted, Laura.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I know that depending on the feedstock, the carbon intensity can vary. And so I was curious but there's also the Oregon law, I believe, that considers it carbon neutral. So it's helpful that, you're treating it as no carbon emissions. So that does answer my question. Thanks.
And then Josh, you've got 3 comments. Maybe you can help us understand what you're trying to ask. Linda, can you unmute Josh Proudfoot, please?
Hello, can you hear me all right?
We can, Josh, thanks.
It was related to all the same questions about RNG. So you're just assuming 0 because there's so many published pathway CIs that are so variable. But it sounds like the default is that it's the carbon intensity is rated as 0. And that's to not deal with all the differences in all those feedstocks. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. We don't know where the RNG is going to be sourced and what the various generation technologies are going to be. And so, I mean, like it was just noted, RNG is carbon neutral, and so yeah, when you combust renewable natural gas, you do get CO2. Obviously, you get some methane emissions from the incomplete combustion and some N2O, and so we do count the incomplete combustion methane and the N2O emissions, but we do not count the CO2 emissions, and basically assume it's carbon neutral that way.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
It's like Ryan has a question.
Ryan, you're unmuted.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. I am just having trouble understanding the answer that was just given. I'm hoping you can put it in some other words. Specifically, like looking at home appliances and methane leakage at that point.
Yeah, in terms of leakage, like I mentioned earlier, we do not distinguish between fossil natural gas and renewable natural gas. So yeah, yes, you are correct. I mean, when we use renewable natural gas in our pipelines and it leaks, it will have the same impact as fossil natural gas, and therefore, fugitive emissions we count the same way for RNG as we do for fossil natural gas. But for once it's combusted, we do not count the carbon, the CO2 from combustion of renewable natural gas.
Does that help, Brian?
Okay. Carry on, Chris?
Carry on. Oh, so I've talked about this already. So this slide is talking about how the hybrid scenario still has some, there's still electricity being used, and there's still like the adoption of like electric heat pumps, but where there's fossil fuels, we're not just blanketly replacing them with electric technologies. We're replacing those with alternative fuels like hydrogen and RNG where possible. So that's just kind of outlining that. So coming to the financial results. So the financial results do not include the programs and regulations adopted and under development. So the way we do the financials, again, this is kind of a repeat from the last meeting, is that we take the difference between the kind of the decarbonization scenario. So if we're looking at the electrification scenario, we take the difference between the prod scenario and the electrification scenario to see what the cost differences between those two scenarios are. So and then the same with the hybrid and the prod. So the prod is our kind of our baseline. We apply financial intensities to that. We apply financial intensities to the decarbonization scenarios, and then we take the difference between the two and see, is there an increase in spending or a decrease in spending, an increase in kind of energy costs or decrease or so on and so forth.
Chris, can I just so basically we're just looking at the financial results of the additional actions that we would take to meet the 2035 goals by 2030.
Yep. So if you can bear with me, if I scooch back really quick. So we're only looking at the impact of, everything underneath this yellow line, all these kind of rainbow colors. We're not looking at the cost of anything up here. We're looking at the difference between all the costs that are at this top line between this line. So if that makes sense.
Just the increment.
That makes sense. And we're not looking so we're limited into the amount of cost to the costs that we're looking at. So again, we're not looking at any, there might be a potential electric transmission and distribution upgrades that might have to happen because of the scenario. We don't know that. We weren't tasked to look at that, so we're not including like those costs. Same thing for like natural gas, like if they're needed more pipelines or something like that for RNG, we're not taking that into account. The same thing could be said for as mentioned for hydrogen production. So if a hydrogen facility had to be built in Oregon, we just don't know, and we're not taking that into account. There's a lot of unknowns that could be costed, but are unknown. And the same thing for like transportation infrastructure. So although we have a lot of costs, not every single cost is accounted for. And so this picture only shows the costs that we feel we could find valuable numbers for and could apply to the modeling.
So basically, just the cost of implementing specific action, program, or regulation.
There's a question about gas leakage from abandoned wellheads, and there are, all of this looks just at Oregon, and there are no abandoned wellheads in Oregon, as I understand it.
Tom, you have a question?
Very quick. You may be coming to this, but are you going to be defining what are direct benefits in a financial sense?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So again, you've seen these numbers. This is kind of a summary of the overall costs and benefits of these two scenarios. So anything that's red is a cost, and anything that's green is a saving or a benefit. So I'm not gonna, you can read the numbers yourself, but you can see obviously the costs, because they're costs, so they're going to require some investment for things to happen and occur, obviously, of course. But that also leads over time to savings. Overall, there's an energy savings that occurs, and there's an operation, kind of an O&M savings that occurs over time. And then layering on top of that, we also looked at some health benefits of addressing these. So we used the EPA's COBRA model, which looks at various health costs associated with, and Bas, you were delving into it more than me, but associated with lots of different kind of pollutants. I think we mainly looked at the particulate matter, or which
particulate matter is the main driver, and then carbon monoxide and volatile organic compounds, and then there's also that's particulate matter from braking and from tire wear. So it's not just from fuel use, but it's also it's sort of driven by vehicle miles traveled, and not just by energy consumed in the transportation sector.
Yeah, so from based on the changes in so again, taking the difference of those pollutants from the PROD scenario to the decarbonization pathways, we put that reduction or that change in those various pollutants into the COBRA model, and these are the numbers that they got spit out back at us. So each of these scenarios produces quite a large savings, because we are reducing the amount of energy we're using and the source of that energy, and therefore the emissions. And then
I would go back one slide, Chris. So two things that are important here. One is notice that this is financial metrics through 2050. So this is a 28-year model. So we did do 2050 because we wanted to be able to capture the full benefits of an action that happened in 2034. And otherwise it would just truncate it and it would make it look weird. So we made the analysis go out to 2050, and therefore you get these large numbers like $70 billion of net savings associated with the scenario actions, and $76 billion associated with the health savings. The other point on the health savings being more than the net benefit mostly from electric savings, it was like 10 to 1 over the O&M savings. I verified that with some other modelers, Evolved Energy, for instance, that has their own model. They did one for Oregon, but they're also doing the Princeton modeling that for the IRA at the national level, and they also did the deep decarbonization study for SETI in the Northwest. They said this is completely consistent with all of the models they've been doing as well, which is that the health benefits outweigh the energy savings benefits, and which is pretty consistent with their stuff. And so we were happy to see that our modeling showed the same magnitude of results. But in the end, it's still $146 billion of net benefit to Oregon, that we were that much better off having done these actions than not having done these actions.
And I see there's some questions. I guess just one more point is that all these numbers have been discounted. So using the net present value calculation with the discount rate of 3%. So from 2020, even there's no real cost in 2020, but starting in 2020, going all the way out to 2050, as Alan indicated. So obviously, if you change that discount rate, and you could apply different discount rates to different actions, but just as a base, we applied a 3% discount rate to the calculation for these results that you're looking at right now. I don't know, Linda or Kathy, if you mind. I'm so noticing the hands pop up. I saw Pat and Tom and then Nora in that order. So yes. I don't know if we want to go that way.
Let's go Nora and Tom and then to Pat.
Okay.
Thank you. I was just curious around health savings. I know we had some discussion earlier around RNG and traditional natural gas. As far as the health benefits considered for the electrification scenario, does that include avoided health costs from transitioning to electric appliances in homes, considering the health risks associated with RNG? And then had a second question around, and I think this came up at our last conversation, and not quite remembering what the plan was, but to incorporate the cost benefits gained from transitioning to clean and electrified ways of building and supporting our transportation system, as a way to protect people from gas price volatility and fluctuations. I think I mentioned at our last meeting that has become common practice for a number of our state agencies to incorporate into their fiscal impact statements. So curious if there's a plan to, or maybe it's already incorporated, but I think last time we spoke, it was not.
So first question is about how the health benefits were considered between RNG and electrification. Was that the question?
Yeah, I'm just curious if that's something the cost analysis took into account as far as health benefits from electrification versus RNG and continued use of methane.
Well, our RNG is in terms of health benefits. RNG is treated the same as fossil natural gas. Of course, it's basically the same. We did not look at the impact of the use of natural gas within dwellings. I mean, the exposure to natural gas in your kitchen, basically. I mean, we hear a lot about that recently, but we did not include that in this analysis. That's not part of the COBRA model. But what we did was we looked for pollutant intensities for the various fuels, and so when we shift fuels in the scenarios, we get different emissions in terms of those pollutants for the various scenarios, and then we take the differences and calculate kind of the reductions for those pollutants for the scenarios, and then that was fed into the COBRA model by county. And then I think COBRA applies a dispersal model because, of course, with the wind coming in from the west, a lot of these pollutants are sort of dispersed over Oregon and outside of Oregon. And so Oregon's reductions, Oregon's pollutant reductions lead to benefits like in Oregon, but elsewhere as well. And so the numbers that you see here, and the net present values, those numbers there are then the sum of the health benefit savings for the Oregon counties. So, I mean, that starts basically at $0 in 2020 before we implement any actions to around $4 billion, a little bit over $4 billion for the various scenarios in 2050. And then sort of, accumulating those savings over time, 2020 to 2050, you end up with the net health benefits that are listed here. So in terms of electricity and renewable natural gas, I think the electric scenario did not address all fossil natural gas use in Oregon. So there's still natural gas use in the electric scenario. And so therefore, there's still there's still like pollutants coming from the combustion of natural gas in the electric scenario, as is the case in the hybrid scenario where we have renewable natural gas combustion, and which leads to the same sort of pollutants. So, sorry, your question was like, did you address like the benefits of electrification over renewable natural gas, or?
Yeah, thank you. I think I followed that, but so what I'm hearing is you didn't look at the health benefits gained or lost based on indoor air quality and
correct, yeah,
used in homes.
We
Okay.
didn't. And that's a very complicated issue. Health benefits inside a dwelling is very complex, and it needs to consider all the aspects of it. And it's recent studies have shown that there are health impacts from the off-gassing and the combustion of, say, gas stoves. But at the same time, the National Fire Protection Agency, which is kind of the Fire Protection Association, is the gold standard for statistics around mortality and fires. They note that there is a death rate 3.4 times higher with electric ranges than with gas ranges, and injury rates are 4.8 times higher with electric ranges than gas ranges, and so you have to take into consider the whole totality of it. So that wasn't part of what we're talking about, but that's something that needs to be addressed in a different forum, but in its totality, because it is quite complex.
You had a second part of your question there, Nora. I'm not sure. Maybe you can repeat it. It seems like an age ago that you asked.
Sure, and I'm happy. I know others have their hands up as well. So if you want to go to someone else, and then for you to come back to me. I don't want to take up all the.
Okay, we'll go to Tom, and then back to you, Nora, and then we'll go to Pat.
Yes. So I'm going to come at this as if I was a critic of this model and find something wrong.
I'm sure there's lots of things wrong.
and it comes back to my earlier question about direct benefits. In many economic impact type analysis, the health benefits would be labeled as indirect effects. Not that, and there's no connotation here that direct is more important than indirect or vice versa. But they would come and say, no, they're tough sometimes to measure, and I don't think they're a direct effect. They're an indirect effect. And thus, if you're doing indirect benefits, why aren't you looking at indirect costs? So how would you come back to that question or criticism?
Just thinking, sorry.
Well, if you go back, so this slide says including health co-benefits. So we are thinking about them not as a direct benefit, but an indirect benefit associated with the co-benefit of particular ones. The direct benefits are those that are the energy expenditure savings and the direct capital costs and the O&M savings are what we consider direct. The health benefits, and if I don't know, Chris, are we going to go into the jobs? Jobs would be indirect benefits associated with them. And social cost of carbon is another way of getting at some of the indirect harms or costs associated with climate change. But that's a little tricky to use here in an Oregon model because those social costs of carbon is really about harms that are occurring at a global scale as opposed to centered on Oregon. These are specific to Oregon. And so I don't have a good example in my head about what you might be thinking about, Tom, in terms of other indirect costs, other than the ones we listed in that caveat slide, which, like the expansion of the transmission, transportation, or electrical systems and distribution systems.
Well, in the other parts of indirect costs, you have critics that say, there's going to be industries that will be hurt by these programs, and there's going to be possible early job losses. And then, you have to talk about the job gains that come from these programs too. So there's a lot involved in that aspect. But I'm a firm believer that the health benefits are very important to have. But I'm just saying, you need to be careful of how you address these and label these as people are assessing, your work.
Yeah.
Tom, at our last meeting, we did look at some of the job impacts that, and some of the job gains. So we do have information on that.
Yeah,
we do show job losses as well, mainly around the automobile kind of maintenance sector.
Yeah, so there's both job losses and job gains in the jobs metric.
Okay. Thank you.
But that's a good point. Thanks, Tom. We will be careful with the labeling in the future.
And I assume that, Bass, maybe you know this better, I assume that COBRA is a net health benefit calculation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would have to look up exactly how they define their the dollars that roll out of the model. I mean, it's based on a difference between two scenarios. There's a background scenario, and then there's a reduction of pollutants that are being fed into the model, and it disperses those reductions or those different pollutant emissions over Oregon and the rest of the country, and then it rolls out data on the healthcare savings for each county in the US. So is that
why don't we follow up and just determine if that's a net benefit or
for the EPA COBRA model? Oh,
yep,
that's a complicated topic unto itself.
Yeah.
Okay, back to Commissioner Apter for the gas price variability. And how that's
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I was just following up on a discussion from the last meeting and curious how the modeling was taking into account high gas prices and just continued gas price volatility and future price fluctuations. Just noting that it's become common practice for state agencies to incorporate and recognize that transitioning to clean energy and efficient and electric buildings and transportation has the ability to shield consumers from price impacts related to gas price volatility. So just curious how that's being taken into account as far as the cost benefits of the electrification scenario.
I can speak to the analysis that we could do. So as of this point, we've kept our we haven't played around with any cost assumptions. Like we put them in and kind of ran with it, and this is the numbers we have. We can, do a sensitivity analysis around those different fuel prices, and obviously, if you like quadrupled the natural gas price and then run the numbers, you could see what impacts that would have kind of on each of those scenarios and how that would change. But I'll leave that up to Alan and Chair McDonald, because I know that's probably part of their plan in the future, but we haven't kind of got to that phase of the project yet.
Yeah, so take into consideration this is a long-term model. It's 28 years through 2050, so that has a long-term perspective to it. Our assumption is that the gas prices gasoline prices and natural gas prices are a blip that come back down into the model. So we don't account for that, mostly because we started the modeling before that happened, and it would have been difficult to go back and do it. Then we might be able to do that in the next round. But saying that just makes the benefits go up, because then you're offsetting higher cost fuels. And so the benefits that you're seeing on this slide and the next slide are actually would then increase because you're offsetting them. And the greenhouse gas emissions basically might go down a bit because of elasticity. People use less with higher prices. With regard to the actions that need to be taken for the CPP and HB 2021, the fact that greenhouse gas emissions, our model starts in 2019 because that's the last official greenhouse gas emissions inventory that Oregon has. They're about to publish the next one, but we don't have that one yet. So we started there, and if it did go up, and it did go up in 2021, down in 20, up in 21, and probably maybe up a little bit in 22, for meeting the requirements of the law associated with the reductions in CPP and HB 2021, it just makes that a little bit more difficult. They have to do more to get to that level in order to meet the legal requirements that are set forth in those two programs and laws. So in the end, as you get down into the later years, you end up in the same place with regard to how much emission reductions we still need to get.
We can play with prices, and we can show the impacts of those price jumps on the model and the financial results for sure.
And that would just increase the benefits, the net benefit.
Great.
So this, you could think of this as conservative.
That's a good point for us to make sure we reflect in the report. Pat, I think you're up next.
Great, thank you, Pat DeLaQuille again. I'm trying to understand these financial metrics better. You've already said that you're not including any cost for a hydrogen capital investment in terms of the production technology. Are these metrics only for the demand side of the energy system? Do they include any supply side investments at all?
No.
Okay.
But
thank you.
But it does include buying that hydrogen at a price.
Right.
But
that's an amortized price.
To get to that price are embedded in that price.
Sure, I understand that.
It's not explicit.
But it's still an amortized price. It doesn't include the impact of having to make a one-time investment and a capital facility that you're going to get a return over time. But I understand I just wanted to be clear. This is really just a demand side look at the energy system.
Thank you for
taking
flagging
price
that for
signals
us.
from production.
Okay.
Pat, we'll make sure we clarify this in the report. Any other questions? Let me see if there are hands up. I don't see any. Don't see anything in the chat. Remind me if, yeah, here we go. We've got more slides.
Yeah, there's a couple more slides, and again, it's just all, I'm filling the time between questions. I guess, the other output is these marginal abatement cost curves. So basically taking for each of the actions and policies we have, like a majority of them have, costs associated with them and emissions reductions. And this is kind of how they play out. So again, we talked about this at the last meeting, so I won't dive too much into that. Another way of looking at it is so you can see, the investment required versus the net implementation. Just some placeholder kind of slides for questions or where that's kind of where I'm at. So wherever you all want to take it. So great discussion and questions so far. It's been awesome.
Great. There's a question from Jay Wilson. Linda, can you elevate Jay? Or unmute him, I mean. Okay. So
Go ahead, Jay.
maybe I'll just read it out. How does petroleum fuel storage come into play with modeling assumptions?
You'd be able to unmute now if you want.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jay Wilson. I'm a local emergency manager, but was the former chair for the State Seismic Commission when we produced the Oregon Resilience Plan. And I worked for a couple of years with the National Institute of Standard and Technology on their community resilience planning for the nation a few years ago. And so from a resilience perspective, I so appreciate the work that's going on here for greenhouse gas reduction. But I wanted to ask about really with the critical energy infrastructure hub that's at the north end of the Willamette River, the 500 tanks that hold over 300 million gallons of oil. Does the status of this facility come into any of your visioning for 2035 and 2050? And the reason I ask is I have been involved in work over the past 3 years that's demonstrated that if this facility fails in an earthquake, it's not only going to be a fuel shortage, but it's going to create an environmental catastrophe that could be the worst oil spill in U.S. history in the Willamette and Lower Columbia right after an earthquake, and with no means to address it. And I think that there is a nexus here between seismic policy, climate change policy, environmental protection, and leverage from all of these to work together collaboratively to build a case for reducing the risk and the reason and purpose to get to the goals that you're promoting. But I haven't heard this folded together as an argument or a way to articulate it. And I wondered whether the commission might hold the status of the CEI hub at 2035 or 2050, drawing it down, decommissioning it in a commensurate way with the less dependency on greenhouse gas production. So therefore, there's win-wins going on here. If we can fold these policies together and have these different camps and different silos come together and work more proactively in the policy arena and the visioning arena. And I hope this very concise kind of question and statement of mine makes sense.
It does. Thank you for that. And I think your point is well taken. You know, maybe collectively we could make sure we have a good path forward to avoid that kind of an impact.
I might add that while the Tigger analysis doesn't take that explicitly into consideration, might be something the commission want to look at. But in a different forum, the Oregon Department of Energy is right now scoping an update to our more than a decade old energy security plan, which would look at all forms of energy and look at climate vulnerability assessments as well as earthquakes and cyber impacts on energy security, and potentially looking at solutions and issues that need further investigation. So that's a 2023-2024 plan that we're scoping right now and seeking funding for in the tune of probably $1 million to really do that up well. So what you're talking about, Jay, would be addressed in that plan, but probably not in this one.
That's great, Alan. Thank you for adding that.
Thank you so much.
Great. Scheduled until 4. We don't need to stay on until 4, but want to make sure we. One thing that might help is maybe, Chris, for you to just show people the big spreadsheet that you have and kind of how to navigate through it, which I And I thought we posted that spreadsheet.
The action spreadsheet.
I was thinking more the, like all the costing and the assumptions and.
Oh, okay, well, let me see. The one that has like the wedges and stuff in it in the financials,
Are you
or
talking
Yeah,
about
I think so.
the one that lists each action separately?
The one
Catherine?
that you've been developing the scenarios with.
Oh, yeah, that's not filled out yet. So we don't have that ready yet.
Oh, okay.
that's my bad.
Yeah. the one- So
Okay.
what we're building for everybody that's listening to this internal conversation, we're building a spreadsheet that lists each action in each of the scenarios and then lists how much the capital cost or how much greenhouse gas emissions it reduces, how much the capital cost is, what's the energy savings, what's the O&M savings, and what's the net cost. And then also we're looking at, and we'll put the source of that information into the spreadsheet. So
Yeah, here's
yeah.
the filled out version.
This is-
That I'll let
Right.
Kathy
We're still building.
patiently
we'll have
waiting
the-
for me to fill it in for them.
Right. It'll have all the detail about each individual action because the way that we got to the scenario net benefit cost calculation is adding up each of the actions, net cost, net benefit, net savings.
Great.
And so that's the sum of this, all this. So we have this data, we just haven't put it in the right format yet.
Yeah, this
Great.
product will be coming soon.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other questions about the model assumptions? How the model works? One of the elements of the model that I'm excited about is the fact that it's built from the counties up. And so I think as we are able to look more at, the pluses and minuses of different policies in, different parts of Oregon, that will help us think about how to design programs to have the best benefits over the state overall.
Yeah, Chris, do you have that presentation up so you can pull up either the health benefits or the jobs one with the two spatial graphs for the state? Like Kathy said, it does get built up each county and then aggregated to get to the state total. So from a legislative standpoint, it's also really nice because you can tell what's happening in your particular part of the county. And I will add what Chris is trying to find, or part of the state. I will add that one of the benefits of doing that, and when we look at it, when Chris pulls this up, you'll see that those benefits are spread across the state. It's not just one, it's like the last two slides, Chris. So it's
this one, I think, right?
Jobs get created all over the, pull up the jobs one. It's the last one, I think.
This one?
All the way down at the bottom.
This one.
That's what he was
right. So yeah, so you see that all the different counties have different employment per capita increases, and in particular in the electrification one, east side gets higher job impacts than does the west side. And the health benefits are similar, where although, as you would think, if it's pollution reductions creating health benefit, where the most pollution is gets the greatest benefit. So that's the Portland metro area. If you go 2 slides up, Chris.
He's there.
Do I have a lag?
Yeah, you must have a lag.
Yeah, there you go.
But
right, so you see that Washington and Multnomah County have the most benefits because they have the most pollution, so they get the most decrease in criteria pollutants, which create more health benefits. And the least amount of pollution, of course, is in the east side, so there's less change that will occur. But it's kind of nice to be able to see this aggregated or disaggregated down to the county level.
Absolutely. Okay, well, hearing no more questions, maybe I'll be quiet for just 60 seconds in case there is another question.
Oh, question.
Yeah, good. For some reason, this program doesn't show me the question, so.
Oh, I think they just raised their hand.
But Laura has a question.
Hi.
Hi, Laura.
Yeah, I forgot to say my name before. Laura Taper. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. I'm just trying to make sure I understand how the cost estimates and that cost benefit analysis work for specific measures, given how you've modeled like the CPP and HB 2021. So for example, if the CPP modeling is done by kind of reducing the emissions intensity of natural gas, does that then affect the benefits that you're getting from electrification measures? Would be one example, but more generally, just trying to understand how those broad brush pieces affect the cost benefit for the incremental measures.
Sure. So here, if you bear with me here. So for example, and this is kind of aggregated up, but I know like, so underneath residential buildings, one of the actions is like building retrofits. And so for that building retrofit action, there's a cost associated with the retrofits. So that, and there's some, well, there's cost associated with anything, but that there's a benefit from reduced energy costs. So you're saving energy, and there's a slight change in operations and maintenance, but mainly the two for like a home retrofit is the capital cost for retrofitting that building, and then the energy savings on that retrofit. So for that action, based on the schedule of retrofits that we do, there will be a capital cost each year for those number of retrofits, and then there will be a cumulative savings of those energy savings for each of those buildings, over time across the years. So, so for each action, we'll have something similar to that. That's just kind of the one example. So anything that fell within the CPP, we didn't do any costing for it. But for these kind of actions that fell outside of like things like CPP and HB 2021, we did take the costing for, and that's the numbers that you're seeing there. Did that answer your question?
I think the other part of it is that the benefits that we're seeing in the new actions reflect the fact that our assumption is that the utilities will meet House Bill 2021, and regulated entities will meet the CPP. So
yes,
right.
the energy intensity is going down through time. And so that affects the size of that wedge.
Right, through 2030, for instance.
Right.
Another way to think about this, Laura, is that EVs is a good example. How does that interplay with the clean fuels program, where the carbon intensity of fuels is reducing over time? So Chris mentioned at the very beginning that the order that you put these things in matters. So for instance, we put in the clean fuels program in first, and it lowers the carbon intensity of gasoline. So when you replace an ICE vehicle with an EV down the road, it reduces less, it creates less reduction in greenhouse gas emissions because of the carbon intensity has already been reduced. So over time, a new EV isn't static. It keeps the last increment of EVs reduces a lot less greenhouse gas emissions than does the first increment, because of the way the model interacts with itself.
Laura, did that help?
Probably just confused her more.
Hope not.
All right, are you? Great, thank you. Excellent. Okay. Then if somebody does have a comment while I'm trying to wrap up, feel free to jump back in and we'll try and take it. So as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, we are planning to get notice out of our next meeting, which will probably be late the week of the October 3rd, I believe, or 4th, 3rd. And we'll get that noticed. We will be focusing in on co-benefits at that meeting, and there'll be a bit of a homework assignment for commissioners, but also, you know, the public can weigh in as well with any thoughts that you have. We'll have time for public comment at the meeting, as well as take written comments in advance. And then the next meeting we're planning for late October, early November, probably more the latter. And that's when we'll really dig in and start to talk through what does the commission want to recommend. Is it one of the two scenarios or some blending of the two scenarios? And how are we going to kind of make those decisions and advance this work? So my assumption is that we may need 2 meetings to get to the bottom of all of that, maybe not. So we'll go ahead and schedule out enough meetings so that we can get this all wrapped up and ready for production in mid-December. And that way it'll be available to the legislature either in December or at the beginning of the new year. So that's the plan going forward. And welcome comments from the public anytime. You can submit those per the instructions on our website, and we distribute those to the commissioners in advance of the meeting, so everybody gets a chance to see what you are all thinking about and wondering about. So this year we will have 2 separate but somewhat connected reports that will go to the legislature. The roadmap will be its own report, and then we'll do the regular report that we do for the legislature to report on where our emissions are today, comment on that, and there'll be kind of a cross-reference in the 2 reports about each other, so that it's clear that both of these should be considered. So that's our plan moving forward. Zach, anything else from your end in terms of things that we need the commissioners and the public to know?
No, thanks, Chair McDonald. You covered it.
Great. Great. Well, with that, seeing no more questions, I will call the September 15th Oregon Global Warming Commission to a close, and do keep an eye out for a press release early next week on our next meeting, and we'll be hoping to have all the materials posted as soon as possible, but likely Tuesday or Wednesday next week. Thanks again for your time. And if you have follow-on questions that you want to ask, feel free to send them to Zach and I, and we can forward those to our excellent team of folks that are been helping us with this great work. So,
Thank you for the questions, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris and team. Great job.
Bye, all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.